This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Okay, welcome to the Heroic Voice. This is going to be our very first panel discussion. We're going to be talking about the nearly legendary David Anthony Kraft. All of us, have history with him. I'm here with Henry Vogel, with Dwight Zimmerman, and with Onrie Kompan. Is that correct pronunciation of your name?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Okay. Dwight is an old school buddy of David Anthony Kraft, who's going to be the subject of our conversation. David was the publisher of, became the publisher of Henry's Ex-Thieves and Southern Knights. Henry, why don't we start with you? Tell us first how you got in touch with David and what he did with you, and then we'll move on to either Henry or Dwight. You take the ball from there, and let's just talk about Dak.
Sure. So I got my start in comics thanks to Dak. He was my first editor. I decided to make a comic book series about a Korean admiral named Yi Shin, and I wanted to make it into a 12-issue miniseries. And when I completed my first issue, I started submitting it to different publishers, and we got rejections from about 15 to 20 different publishers. And after that point, I kind of realized that it might help if I brought an editor on board. So I got in touch with Jim Salicrup through Facebook. And my initial thought was to ask him to edit the book, but he didn't have time, so he put me in touch with Dak. And so I reached out to Dak, and I was familiar with his work, and he was glad to come on board and help. And we just hit it off right away. And over the course of 12 years that we were working together, he really helped me hone my skills as a comics creator in terms of writing, in terms of sequential storytelling and editorial, publishing, everything. He basically passed all of his skills on to me, and we worked as partners on Yi Shin. And he was a wonderful person to work with. He was always very forward thinking when it came to storytelling and was really pushing the needle and always trying to get the best out of everyone on the team. And that was something I really appreciated about him. And he really pushed me so that I was always trying to get the best out of myself too. So I had a very great
I
experience
hear
with
that
him.
story a lot about Dave. Henry, we're moving backwards here from the one who knew him most recently to you, and then we'll go to Dwight, who knew him the longest. So your first encounter with David Anthony Kraft.
Well, as someone who had read comics considerably less time than most people my age had, since I really didn't get into comics until I was 18. But still, I was aware of, I'd read some of Dak's work and things like that. But honestly, my first real interaction with him was I think he sort of bomb mailed every comic book associated company a copy of Comics Interview #1 when it came out. And, I was happy to get it. I read it. It was an interesting issue. I enjoyed it. But I didn't think that much about it until about maybe a year later. Dak wrote a letter to me And he said, hey, we don't live that far apart, because I was in Clemson, South Carolina, up in the northwest corner of South Carolina, and he was in Clayton, Georgia, the northeast corner of Georgia. So we were about, it was through the mountains, but it was only about a 90-minute drive between the two of us. And I honestly didn't think we had anybody anywhere near us in the comics industry. But of course, I was thinking back to the comics interview book that had shown up. It showed up with a New York return address. It had New York addresses on the inside. And that was all because Dak had said, you have to have a New York address if you're going to be trying to do anything major with comic books. If you're anywhere else, nobody will pay any attention to you. At least that's the way it was at that time.
Back in the day. Yeah.
And so he sent that letter, and I was like, oh, well, that's totally different. So we exchanged a few messages, a few phone calls, things like that. And this was, we were approaching the release of Southern Nights. We had released Southern Nights #6, and we're about to release #7. And trying to keep up with the publishing side of stuff while also writing the book and, dealing with all of that crap. It was really starting to get very difficult for me trying to keep up with that. Because quite frankly, I was learning by doing. I had horribly misplaced confidence in my knowledge of publishing at the time that we brought out the first book. So good thing I had it. Otherwise, the book wouldn't exist. But still, and I just happened to find myself on the phone with Dak one day. And this is a story I've told before, but I had just that day gotten a letter back from First Comics. I had sent them some copies. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but what the heck? They were the first place. I was like, if you'd like to publish our book, we'd like to be published by you. And they sent us a very polite and very kind rejection. I was very happy with that, but I mentioned that to Dak. They're like, yeah, we were trying to find somebody to publish the book. First has already shot it down, and so I'm thinking maybe. And Dak goes like, "You're looking for somebody to publish the book?" And I was like, yes, I am. I want to write it, not publish it so much anymore. And he said, I've been thinking about branching off into comics. And so it was a perfect sort of setup. We arranged a meeting. David Willis, my original partner with the Knights, and I drove down to see Dak, and we talked about everything. We discovered, as Onrie did, we got along with Dak incredibly well. He was a very easy person to get along with, and we talked about ideas and things that we were wanting to do, and also the legal aspects of him moving in and taking over. And what he discovered was we were reasonable people, and we didn't want anything really complex. We just wanted to set up a way to keep the book going and maybe get some money. That would have, because we were going issue to issue. We were very much hand to mouth at the time. And more importantly, let somebody else deal with all those distributors and printers and pay the artists and the letterers and all that sort of stuff. And on top of that, to begin with, I got Dak as an editor, well known for the line of, when he called me up one day, this would have been actually X Thieves #1 of the ongoing series that featured the Southern Nights crossover, where he told me, I deleted your favorite line. And I was like, how do you know it was my favorite line? Oh, it was your favorite line. And it was. But still, I got, first of all, him editing, and then to hand it back towards Dwight, Dak brought Dwight in to edit both the Southern Nights and the X Thieves. I don't remember which one you started with, Dwight, but I did it. I think I think probably the X Thieves
All
because I
right,
remember I sent
Editor
a
Zimmerman, why don't you take it from here? You have a much longer history with David Anthony Kraft than the rest of us do. Tell us about him. The little
Well,
Dak.
well, yes. Well, my history with Dave goes back to high school. We were classmates in art class, and he had rudimentary talent, and I had absolutely no talent. I mean, I can't draw, and I can prove it. Um, so anyway, I'm not going to get into the long story of all of that because it is a long story. The upshot is that, uh, well, condensing it. Dave and I were such passionate comic book and science fiction fans that in high school, now, what you have to remember is this is the late 1960s and 1970s. So, in other words, it's way pre-internet. So everything is analog. And we produced two fanzines, fan magazines, and Roy Thomas, at the time the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, was a subscriber of one of our fanzines, a biographical zine uh, about a pulp fiction author, Otis Adelbert Klein. And um, you know, post-graduate, high school graduation, and blah 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 blah. I'm really condensing. Dave, at one point, um, contacted Roy and said, "I want to write for you." And Roy said, "We don't have an opening for a writer." This is when Dave was living in Raven County, Georgia. Yeah, there are many long stories connected to all of this. Uh, the upshot being that Roy said, no, we don't have an opening for a writer, but we have an opening for an assistant editor. And that got Dave, and Dave said yes, and that got him in the door, and thus began his career. And me, I had a separate career path, but we stayed in touch. And at one point, he helped me get into Marvel. And at after several years, now Dave always wanted to be a publisher. Uh, Prior to the Comics Interview comics line, he had a book publishing line called Fictioneer Books.
Yes.
He published stories from Robert E. Howard, A.E. Van Vogt, and a few other science fiction authors. It was a short-lived line. And then he went to Marvel, and um, he started up Comics Interview, which thanks to, it was actually a concept pitched to him by Jim Salicrup, who was influenced by Andy Warhol's Interview magazine. The concept being that it's insiders talking about, you know, the industry, yeah, and everything. And one thing led to another. Dave started up Comics Interview, and I uh, there was this one time I flew down to Georgia from New York City to visit Dave, and that's when he told me that he was planning to launch a line of comic book titles. Uh, One of them was Southern Nights, which he said was the Henry Vogel, project that he already told you about, as well as a post-apocalyptic science fiction title, Micra, from Lamar Waldron and Ted Boone Tanaka, and another science fiction title called Psychops by Julie Woodcock and Brian Stelfreeze. So, we're chatting away, and you know, Dave, specifically on Micro, he showed me the concept and asked for my input. So
For those
I,
who don't know, let me just interrupt you, Dwight. Micro was a robot that was animated remotely by a human consciousness, if I remember correctly.
you are correct. So I'm reading this concept and I was really fascinated by it. It was very well developed. I was much impressed by, what Lamar put down. I saw some flaws. Well, uh, and uh, after reading it, I started writing down my commentary slash critique, which wound up being this ridiculously long thing. I forget how many pages at this point. Um, but I passed it over to Dave, and Dave looked at me and he just said, "Do you want to edit it?" And I had never thought of myself as being an editor, but he was so impressed by my critique that he said, "You can edit this thing." And I said, "Well, okay." I mean, sure, let's do it. Uh,
Basically, you're amplifying the fact that Dave was gregarious, friendly, and he put his confidence in other people. Right? He didn't rely on himself alone.
well, keep in mind too that he and I had a long-standing relationship. We knew each other, and also what you also don't know is I ghost collaborated on quite a few of his stories. This was post well, it was all the She-Hulk stories and a good share of the Defender stories, and the Captain America stories. So, in other words, I mean, he helped me develop my writing craft,
So to speak.
and so we, in addition to being, high school classmates, I mean, we really had a great, intimate, creative relationship. So he knew where I was coming from. And when I did that critique, he felt confident that I could do this. And I said, well, okay, fine. Uh, so I started out editing Micra and Psychops. And then at one point he said, can you handle Henry, and the Southern Knights? And because Henry, yes, I started out editing Southern Knights, and then when you guys came up with X Thieves, that was just a natural. So what you also need to know about is the fact that, okay, so Henry's in South Carolina, Dave is in Georgia, I'm in New York City, well, Brooklyn, New York, and this is at a time prior to the internet. So everything is analog. So communication was via the mail and telephone and FedEx. So it was really a complex dance
Oh yeah.
to get everything, coordinated and out the door. Uh,
And that was still the case through the 80s as well. Had to deal with art being sent through the mail, which you don't have to deal with anymore, right? Because everything can be sent digitally these days. All the work can be done digitally. I'm sorry. I guess I did kind of mean to interrupt you, but please finish the story, Dwight.
it was our relationship. Well, I can only speak about my relationship with Henry, in this respect, because Onrie was with Dave. Um, but it was just such a fun experience because Henry brought a wonderful original take, on the superhero concept. And then when they got into the X Thieves thing, which was quite frankly it was exploiting the whole X, you know, X-Men, uh, uh, concept, rage, because comic book uh, shops, they would see anything that had an X in front of it. They started buying that. And this was and Henry, you can, add your take on this.
Well,
But
Henry, feel free to jump in if there's anything that Dwight said.
Honestly, I feel like it's so interesting for me to hear all these stories. It's really, I worked with Dak in his twilight years, and it's so interesting to me to hear these stories from Dwight because both Dwight and Henry, I haven't really gotten a chance to get to know you guys, unfortunately, until after Dak's passing. So I'm just kind of listening to these stories and enjoying what I'm hearing.
Well, I can add on to the story that Dwight was just talking about with the X and all that. So when we created the full title, it was the Aristocratic Extraterrestrial Time Traveling Thieves. So obviously playing off of the thing that everybody was playing off of at the time, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We knew we were playing off of that in the title, but that was the only thing we were doing. Everybody else was trying to come up with animal-based superhero teams or whatever. We weren't trying to copy anything but their title structure. And we obviously you put extraterrestrial started with an X instead of EX, did that on purpose with the express intent of running 2 or 3 issues with the full title and then replacing it with X Thieves. That was the first thing Dak said when I sort of came up with the title, kind of. I think it was me, but it was, things were flying very fast that day when we developed it. And I think I sort of came up with that title structure, and Dak was like, yeah, extraterrestrial with an X. And later we just turn them into the X Thieves because X is always a very good letter to start your comic book with. So
Henry,
we ended up.
do you want to mention Mark Probst on this?
Yes. Mark was drawing the Southern Knights at the time, and Mark had come up from Pensacola, and I had driven down from Greenville to way atop Screamer Mountain, which is where Dak's house was, practically at the top of a mountain. And we were going to do some planning for Southern Night stories and get some stuff set up so that we could do whatever. We were planning for the next half a dozen issues of the Southern Nights. It was a Saturday. Dak got a phone call. It was a business phone call. So he went off to talk. And so we weren't going to be able to brainstorm as well since we wanted Dak's input on all of the brainstorming. So Mark pulls out artwork and starts working on it. I think it probably was Southern Nights artwork, but he started working on it, and I got bored. And a bored writer is a very dangerous thing. So desperate for anything to do, I went over to Mark's art case, which of course, like an artist, he carried it everywhere. And it had all the samples in there. And just for the heck of it, I started flipping through. And I came to the original drawing that had Fred standing there and Bianca kneeling next to him. And the characters drawn there captivated me. I was really, it's like, wow, these guys are cool. Who are they? So I asked Mark, and Mark said, oh, that's just something I drew to show versatility. I'm like, no. There must be something behind this. And I don't know why I immediately thought high-end, high-class thieves, the kind that you see in caper movies, and you're actually pulling for the jewel thief to pull it off because he's so cool and smooth and all that. But I was like, no, they're thieves. And I started talking about who they were and putting in some ideas behind them and spreading them, putting them in a science fiction sort of universe setting. And Mark started offering ideas, and we were going back and forth on things. And we had, I think we had just begun dealing with the Fredmobile, which was basically just a TARDIS that looked better.
Well, I have to interject something here because uh, part of the fun of the X Thieves was it wound up being a satire. Yeah, and there was a situation where um, comic book store owners were incredibly paranoid. Okay, so Dave with Comics Interview, he's doing the Frank Knight Dark Knight issue, and he's telling the distributor, this thing's going to be huge, really huge, and of course, the shops are not buying into it, and then the uh, the issue comes out, and it sells out immediately. And of course, the shops are saying, "You screwed us. Uh, you didn't print enough copies." Well, it's like no, Dave is a small company. He can't afford to print more than, well, he'll do like a tiny bit more, but he can't print more than what his orders are in the direct market. So Henry, so this was the inspiration for an ex thieves story. Henry, was it zirconium silicate or
Well, that was xylocaine.
xylocaine? Yeah.
Yes.
So take it from here.
Well, actually, we had so much fun with the X Thieves because we were pulling from things that were going on in comic books.
And the
Yeah, I
real
know.
world,
That's the fun
the
part about
original
the
story was
satire.
Coca-Cola.
The new Coke story, I
Oh
absolutely
yeah, I
love
love that one.
That was the crossover with the Southern Knights.
Yeah.
It remains, if you want to consider that a partial Southern Knights issue, it remains the best-selling Southern Knights issue ever. But I came up with the idea. We were like, okay, let's cross them over because established Southern Knights and X Thieves, and Dak's like, yes, and we'll put it in a Southern Knights issue. I was like, why would we do that? Look at the orders we just had for the X Thieves. The Southern Knights isn't selling that well. Let's do it the other way around. And I managed to, he looked at us like, yeah, you're right. Okay, we'll do it the other way around. And so we spoofed the whole idea of New Coke, which again that's the episode where I lost my favorite line. There was a scene when we get a look at the Coke boardroom where they're sure that those fiends from Pepsi have stolen the formula for Coke and they need to get it back, and they're going to deliver an ultimatum to Pepsi-Cola and PepsiCo, whatever they're called. And if they didn't return it, then they were going to go to the bunkers and deploy Coca-Cola's nuclear arsenal, which was kind of a fun idea all by itself. Then again, of course, Coke had more money than quite a few first world countries at that time, but still, my line was the guy, the chairman of the board said, and if they don't turn it back, we're going to deploy our arsenal and nuke them till they glow. And that's where it stops in the book. I had nuke them till they glow, then nuke them some mo. And that's the line Dak cut, the last line there. But the second issue of the actual main series, yes, I think it was the second issue. It was Reality in Comics. And Dwight, that exists because of you. Dak told me that was when Marvel was doing the new universe. And he said that you would call and you were so tired of hearing about, we've got to, reality in comics. We've got to be realistic. This is going to be the real sort of thing. And you were so sick and tired of that that I was like, okay, we can work with that. We'll get rid of reality. So um, thank you for that one, Dwight. I like that as that episode too.
Let's, in the little bit of time we have left, sadly, our schedule only allows for half an hour or so for this. Some personal memories. Let's start with you, Henri. You've talked about Dak, but is there any one incident that would really define him for you?
Well, it's interesting hearing both Henry and Dwight's experiences working with Dak puts a lot of pieces in place for me. Based on the things that they were saying, it's like he always went for what was strongest, even if it meant that he wasn't necessarily right. And there were a lot of situations like that where he was always in service of the story. It was never about one individual person. It was always about how do we do what's best for everybody, or for what's best for the story, not even what's best for everybody. What's best for the story. And it's like even cutting that line from Henry's story, like, Newcomb, and he cut that other part of the line because the entire line was good, but Newcomb Samoa, it's like I could totally see him doing that, and that would be a lot of the things that he did for me. But
I would have done that if it makes you
yeah,
feel
right.
better.
Well, but I mean, it was never, he would never do these things with the sense of, I'm going to do this so that I could lord control over you. It was always like, I'm doing this because it's what's best for the story. And even when Henry, had mentioned something to him about, uh, changing things up, he was open to that. And Dak was always like that, and we always treated everything we did as if we're making it for the crowd of today. You don't think about, he never looked at work as something that was uh, that would fall behind. It was always relevant. It was always in the now.
Henry,
And
Henry,
that,
let me cut you off. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Henry.
yeah.
Any one particular moment that would define Dave for you?
I don't know if I would say there was one particular moment, but I would go with the fact that and you're seeing this from all of us here. I worked with Dak, but Dak was my friend. He was he treated us all as like we were this little comics interview publications family. He would have parties at his house and all of us were invited. We would show up, he'd have people from town come in, and we they were I looked forward to those all the time because they were always so much fun. We would rag on each other, we'd joke, we'd kid, we'd talk about comic books too. But all the time, he made sure it was fun. It wasn't like, oh, now we have to do hard work and we have to do stuff we don't like. It was no, it wasn't anything like that. He made it all fun, and you knew it wasn't, that even if we had never gone with Dak, even if we had never started publishing stuff, if we had gotten together with him at any time, we would have kept seeing each other because we kept doing that after the Southern Knights and the X Thieves stopped publishing. They were, we kept up the friendship, and it just stretches across decades, and I think that's his greatest legacy is how he sort of brought us all in.
Dwight, you're the oldest friend here.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts that you want to share with us about David
Well,
Anthony Kraft?
frankly, it's impossible for me to pick, a particular item because, it started in high school and it went through all kinds of things. I was there when he had his near fatal accident, motorcycle accident, and helped him recover from that. Setting up the comic book line and everything else, he helped me develop my writing career. It's quite frankly, I'm forever grateful for the opportunities that he opened for me, to develop my comic book career, and then it wound up going into military history. I became a New York Times bestselling writer. And fundamentally, in my first book, military history book that I did, I dedicated that to him. I'm forever grateful for the opportunities that he gave me. That I went onto my career. Yeah, well, that's obviously on me. But in point of fact, if it hadn't been for him, I never would have achieved anything of what I have at all.
A wonderful
So,
tribute. Let's wrap this up. Gentlemen, thank you for this. I hope, people who may not be aware of David Anthony Kraft will now be aware of him, for all the work he did at Marvel, his comics interview group, all the people that he helped do this. I remember him fondly. We met, I think it was one of the first Atlanta Fantasy Fairs. I think that's right, Henry. I met you and him
Probably.
at that. Yeah. Also Lamar. I met Lamar at that.
He used to run that.
He did, yeah. And the lovely woman who became his wife, I remember her quite well. But anyway, thank you again, gentlemen. We will close this down. I want to encourage people to like this, share it, give me your comments. This format is one we haven't used before, where we have a panel discussion. Would you like to see that again on some topic? Or do you prefer the one-on-one interviews that we